Playguide video review. Sit back and enjoy the show.
Hi there, welcome to another Lemon Commodore 64 game guide and review. This time we'll be taking a look, yes, at Super Hang-On, developed by Software Studios and published by Electric Dreams in 1987. And from the loading picture, that looks reasonable enough, but as we all know, that is probably the best part of this gaming experience. Let's press F1 and load Africa from one of the two tracks available to us on side A of this tape, and I'm of course playing this from the emulation, but it emulates the tape perfectly, including these massive loading waiting states. On the actual title screen we get some music and we get the high scores, which is pretty basic, but that's probably all we can expect. This emulates the arcade experience, and they've even had a go at changing the arcade font as well. And the music, well, that's completely different from the arcade version, and the music in this game is absolutely unique to the Commodore 64 experience. Having enjoyed a welcoming atmosphere, let's press fire and let's see if this game lives up to all those expectations. Just like the arcade, we get a music selection screen from one of 4 tracks in this game. We'll just select the first one for now, and that transports us to the very start of a series of stages which make up a level. There are 4 levels in this game, spread over 4 continents. And just like most racing games, it is important to stay on that track and to get from A to B. And getting from A to B in the shortest time possible is the aim of the game, but if you veer off that track, then you'll unfortunately have a crash. And that will mean a detriment to your time, because each of these stages is timed. You'll have to make it in time, and any time remaining left over will be added as bonus time to the next stage. If you gain too many knocks or take too many crashes, then you will run out of time, and as you can see, I'm about to run out of time on this particular stage, and now it's game over. The Africa stages are probably the easiest level in the entire game, and so it will probably take some kind of perseverance to get through this because of a number of reasons, as we shall get to later on. Let's use our controller to enter our name into the high score table. Fortunately, I cannot type that in using the keyboard. Let's choose a different track. The last track is perhaps the most boring, and that will emulate this game because we are about to travel the easiest level, yet again, Africa, and this time let's try to not go off. Perhaps the first thing the player will notice is a tremendous speed drop in this game compared to many other games, and I'd say this thing runs at maybe 4 frames per second, and you can see a very jerky appearance of those trees and cacti and rocks by the side of the road, and we've already seen better games than this. I'm just going to speed this footage up 150%. That's half again, and you can see it's much smoother, and this is the kind of experience that we really should have got playing the 64 version of the Super Hang-On experience. This is kind of like the Amiga game, only on the Commodore 64 you would imagine it's a little more smooth than this, and even at 150% the frame rate isn't amazing. But you can see for now we are entering a variety of landscapes with a variety of landscapes scrolling away on the background, and everything from the arcade is in there, It's just that this game doesn't really feel much of an arcade racer. The track layout of the races on offer is identical among the 8 and the 16-bit conversions, and so you will find this mirrors the Amiga version, or rather the ported ST version that we got on the Amiga. And for that we will find that this particular level is the Birdland level, which appears on the Amiga, and you have to be careful to get a great start, otherwise you'll get delayed and you will hesitate to use that turbo, because if you use that turbo on this particular stage, of course you'll be off, and so that's why you'll see me flashing away with a turbo. But unfortunately, if you get to the hardest bend, which this is, it's more or less a hairpin. If you use any kind of turbo here, then you'll certainly be off, and those other riders make sure that we collide, slow down, and lose a tremendous amount of time. Which, well, perhaps this is the slowest corner in the entire game. It's certainly one of the most infuriating with all those other riders. So let's just speed this game up again, back to 150%, and let's just enjoy the experience again, what we could have had on the C64 if they'd optimized the code to such levels as the Great American Cross Country Road Race and Super Cycle. Unfortunately they didn't, and on full turbo, which we get when we are absolute full revs, we hold down the fire button, we'll gain full turbo, and that means our revs will go red and it will go white again when we are in normal acceleration. But unlike the Amiga version, if we bump into the back of those guys, it really doesn't take much time to get back to full speed and full turbo again, and that's a good thing on the C64 version. And tapping into the sides of those other riders won't really detriment us either, and that's also a great thing. But if we touch the scenery and go off, then that really will slow us down, and when we slow down enough, then those other riders will make our life hell. And you can see, bumping into the back, we can soon overtake those guys again, and I find that is absolutely great, because who needs slow frame rates when the maximum frame rate is actually the minimum requirement? And you can see, trying to rush through that scenery, trying to make this game playable, I actually went off, and that's a fair off in this instance. Yes, they are very detailed trees actually, with many branches, but why couldn't they have made those simpler and optimized the code to make this even smoother? Is actually possible to memorize all these corners and veer to the right side of the road and take these corners at relatively high speed by simply taking the finger off the button and reducing the amount of turbo. But in this game, the player is absolutely anxious to get on the move as quickly as possible, and therefore they will jam the turbo as much as possible, leading to offs and much frustration. So the actual gameplay itself leading to the player making mistakes. Finally, we are heading to the last section of this first level, and in Africa it's more or less flat out, and you can see we have plenty of time. It even takes its time to print goal ahead flashing away on that screen, and that probably reduces the frame rates even more. Finally, we get towards the end of this level, and I have to say the Africa experience isn't really enjoyable, and even though there are fewer stages on this Africa race, it's still very tough. We've managed to make the line with 6 seconds remaining, which gives us 6 million points, and compared to the Amiga version, that's absolutely terrible. And look at that, we haven't even made the high score table. So you really need more than 6, maybe even 7, 8, 9 seconds to even get number 1 on the high score table. But let it not be said that this guide isn't a fair review of this game. Let's change the tracks, let's swap the tape over, and on the other side, instead of the easy and good courses, we find the even easier and the hard course. And so we'll be checking out the even easier one, that's America, and in America we also get to change that soundtrack. So let's change, hopefully, to a better soundtrack, and let's try this game again. America section is perhaps the easiest in the entire game, and I think that the first few levels are the easiest, and it gives the player a nice cushion of time if they can get through these without too many mistakes, and that crash and bump would not result in an off on the C64 version, and that would result in a severe detriment probably on the others, and it really gives the player a break by simply driving through the centre of those. And statistically, the very centre of that road is the place where the fewest vehicles appear, and so you can really get through that traffic. Taking a look at the graphics, you may notice that the second frame of these lamps is actually drawn in a diagonal, and the third and fourth frame is drawn in a horizontal, so it makes those things literally bow down the screen. And you can see on the horizon, when it jumps into view, that thing does not stretch across the entire width, not like the map. So they could have used the entire width of the screen, but no, they had to put a block into the background. And you can see plenty of detail still on the boulders and on the environment, and even the sides of the road has those usual white, in this case green and red chevrons, and that means that we know where the edges of the track is. But apart from that, the graphics on offer, apart from changing colour, is very basic, and it really doesn't give us much of an impression of moving through different parts of the world. And a few knocks later on make sure that we get bored of the experience, and as soon as the player gets bored of the experience, then that's another time when they're likely to have some offs. But as usual, following those chevrons, getting over to the right side of that road means that usually we can stay on that thing and we can make some progress. On this play, you may notice that there is a stray pixel running around the back of our back, and perhaps that is an emulation bug, Of the 4 music tracks, only one of them is actually listenable to my ears, and that's this one, but unfortunately the sound effects really let this game down. No, we can't have digitized skidding noises because we've had digitized speech in games before now. No, we have to make sure that we have the most annoying skidding noise whenever we traverse around any corners and whenever we bump any vehicles and have to speed up all over again. And that just adds insult to injury in this game. Perhaps it would have been better to have an option to switch the music and the sound effects off and have some kind of decent playability, rather than have the best compromise, which this game certainly is. Maybe the engine itself was broken because, well, as we shall see later on, this game engine was used in actually Enduro Racer for the C64, and so if you thought Enduro Racer was bad, then, well, it uses exactly the same game engine. I originally had this, but I didn't really buy this intentionally. I had that on the Game Set and Match 2 pack, which was released by Ocean, and out of all these games, Track and Field was certainly the best. Championship Sprint wasn't too bad, and, well, Basket Master wasn't too bad. The rest were pretty dire. So I had that pack, and I'm glad to say I didn't really play it much, but that was certainly one of the packs that I had, among many, on the Commodore 64. Some may argue that the Commodore 64 was never meant to run games like this, but I point out the great frame rates in other games that we've seen already, and well, pole position was better than this on the Commodore 64, and we've also seen other titles like the great Outrun Europa, which is probably the best of these titles, and it's certainly better in my opinion than Turbocharge, which was a similar high-octane, high-speed game with great high-speed filled in smooth graphics, probably 1000% better than this. So it was possible to get beyond Pit Stop 2 on the Commodore 64, and it was even possible to create a game without any bugs in it. But unfortunately, look at this, we are driving down the middle of the road and suddenly we are off to one side and we crash into that landscape. And it is a bug in the game, but it's unusual in a game to actually use a bug to your own advantage, and if you position that controller to the down and to the right position at just the wrong time, that will automatically flip you over to the other side of that road, which on the surface might not sound too great. If you fall into that trap, that will just happen to you, but if you figure out that that is possible, you can simply flip your wrist and activate that, and hopefully you will play on that other side of the road. So there you go, just like that. Fortunately we didn't collide with that cacti, but we used exactly the same trick and we tripped the bug and we got around that problem. So you have to be careful not to use that bug, and it is possible to use that thing to your own advantage. Let's take a look at the background to this game. It was published by Electric Dreams, who at the time had a great reputation on the C64, but they really hurt their reputation with games like this. It was coded by Paul Freeman and Darrell Etherington. Paul converted Stormbringer and Nighttime from the ZX Spectrum onto the C64, and it was also co-coded by Jonathan Dean. Now, Jonathan Dean began with his conversion of Wonder Boy in 1987, and anyone who's played the great C64 version of Wonder Boy will know it's virtually as arcade perfect as you're probably going to get. And he converted that for Activision, and so Activision were so impressed that they gave him the job of converting games such as Enduro Racer in 1987. He also created the arcade conversion of Quartet in 1987, and Activision again were so impressed that he actually got promoted and became the producer at Software Studios, and moved on to games such as Afterburner in 1988, Karnov in 1988, and Galaxy Force appeared in 1989. So, with a history of absolutely dire games on the C64, it appears Jonathan Dean began with a great game and since then used an absolutely diabolical game engine such as this to create many diabolical games on the Commodore 64. And it's a shame that we had to track back the producer of Karnov and Quartet and of course Afterburner all the way back to this, but it appears so. On the 64 you can see we're still crawling through the 14 stages in America, and Africa with its 6 stages is pretty hard, Asia with its 10 stages is very hard and boring, and it takes a very good player to play Asia. America is probably the easiest with its 14, but again 14 makes it very boring, and Europe is very difficult with 18 stages, so we certainly will not be playing Europe. This is the very final track if I manage to complete this, and I'm actually going to speed up this footage now so that we can cut down the time that you have to endure watching me play this game. And whilst we do that, I'll cover the music, which was created by Steve Barrett, also known as the Eggman, and that wasn't bad. He moved on to Double Dragon 2 music for MiG-29 Soviet Fighter, great game, and also the music for Tarzan Goes Ape in 1991. I think the fact that this game came out in 1987 seriously hurt it, because the fact that the Sega Arcade original appeared in 87 meant that this was a rush job at the best of times. Unfortunately, this is the very worst conversion to appear on any platform. In fact, the Amiga version isn't half bad, even though that was a rushed, half-hearted port of the Guitar ST version, and the two are absolutely identical. And the Commodore 64 version is actually worse than the ZX Spectrum version. The ZX Spectrum version was rated 27 in the Your Sinclair Top 100 ZX Spectrum games. So it's within the top 30 on ZX, certainly within the top 30 maybe on the Amiga and ST, but unfortunately on the 64 it certainly rates among the bottom 30 games that I've ever actually played. And it might be surprising to note that I did actually play this for quite some time. I didn't really get to be a master of this on the 64, but of course as soon as better games came along, then this never saw the light of day again, and you wouldn't really blame me for that. Finally, at this point we would move on to the scores, but it might surprise you to learn that no magazine actually bothered to review this game, and there were of course several magazines active in this period. Zap had been going for several years by this time, but Zap didn't touch it with a barge pole. In fact, after extensive research, I only found one publication that actually rated Super Hang-On for the Commodore 64, and that was the German ASM magazine, who gave this game 63% in January 1988. The current score on the Lemon C64 website is currently 3.8%, and a bag of dirt rating for that. And on the Moby Games website, that garnered 2.8% from the crowd on there. That gives the Commodore 64 version of Super Hang-On an average score of 3.5 out of 10, and I'd say that's pretty generous, but then there are a very wide selection of worse games than this on the Commodore 64, and dare I say some driving games as well. Finally, after some laborious time, we managed to make it all the way through to the end of the checkpoint, and that closes the stage and the level and the continent, and in this case my review. We made it with 3 seconds to spare, which isn't absolutely amazing, but that does in this case guarantee us the top spot. So that's my review of the Commodore 64 version of Super Hang-On. Hope to see you with a significantly better game at some point soon. Thank you.